Buon pomeriggio a tutti. Qualcuno di voi è già stato qua ieri che abbiamo aperto 4 mostre. Oggi invece presentiamo un libro che è un libro scritto da Bal-Blanc e pubblicato da NERO, che è questo. The Continuum Was Performed in the Following Manner, ed è un libro, un lungo saggio che è una sorta di memoria o come dire, delle riflessioni a posteriori su una mostra, in questo caso specifico Documenta 14, il cui direttore artistico Adam Szymczyk è anche qui per discuterne con Pierre, che era uno dei curatori, e questo dialogo sarà moderato da Salvatore Lacagnina, che a sua volta anche è stato coinvolto in questo progetto. Poi casualmente oggi a Roma c'è anche Paul Presiado, quindi c'è una specie di pezzo di Documenta a Roma. I urge they is doing something in a Fendi, Fondazione Fendi, and so the book is about the last Documenta, and so it came out basically now when the very last edition of Documenta opened, like a few days ago, and yesterday also was a big buzz around that, as there were lots of discussion at the end of the Documenta 14, so in terms of time, maybe in the Documenta 14 everything happened at the end, here everything is happening at the beginning. And I think, I mean, we also here we do so many exhibitions, so sometimes it's very refreshing to have the time to reflect about what you have done, while very often we are always like looking forward. And so I think, it's quite, I mean, in a way it's unusual to have a book of this type. This sort of memoir of experience, and so I will leave the floor to Pierre, Adam, and Salvatore, and I think at the end, of course, everyone is. If you have any questions, I think you are very open to kind of opening up.
So first of all, thanks to Luca Lopinto and to Macro for hosting this presentation. This is the book. You are all invited to buy it, either in English, either in Italian, and the Italian version is coming in the next days. You can order it online. Where do we start from? Documenta. I think everyone here knows what Documenta is, but I think we should consider that this very big exhibition is very different from all the Biennale system that has been growing in worldwide in the past 20 years, because if you think that is the only place where curators or directors can conceive an exhibition during 5 years research, this makes a huge difference. And in general, the history of contemporary art, if we can say that, and the history of contemporary display and institutionalization of art has been always linked to the development that Documenta brought. And I think each curator, each artistic director, as it's called, had to confront, first of all, with the history of the exhibition of Documenta itself. So I guess when you arrive there, you start thinking what is your position toward what happened before and where to lead the discussion. Adam Szymczyk proposal, because it works with curators invited to submit a proposal by a selection committee, which is changing every time, right? And Adam Szymczyk proposal was very precise from the very beginning, and the idea was to have 2 exhibitions of documenta, one taking place in Kassel, this small city in the northwest of Germany, and the other one taking place in Athens. The proposal was very precise since the beginning, that the 2 shows had to have the same weight, the same potential. It was not just Kassel plus a little bit Athens, but 2 exhibition, 2 reiteration of the same exhibition. Having said that, every documenta in some ways creates a lot of discussions locally, because beside we perceive it as an important global exhibition, as one would say today, it's anyway rooted in one city, in one part of a country called Germany, with its traditions, with its expectations, also economical expectations, because today we see the number of visitors are around 1 million, so you can imagine on a city of 300,000 inhabitants or so, what's the impact in 100 days. And of course, D14, Documenta 14 was having an impact in the city and opening and raising a lot of discussions within the political frame of Germany with this move to Athens. But I think these are contents that we will develop during the evening. And Pierre Bal-Blanc, which was one of the curators invited by Adam Szymczyk to share, let's say, the curatorial part, which was already like one of the first times where many curators were involved together with the artistic director. Pierre Bal-Blanc decided, I think, in the last few months or in the last years, that it was important to nail some contents and to reflect, as Luca was saying, afterwards. What was happening, why it happened, what was our aim. And he does it in a very personal way. So the story of Documenta that you read in this essay is a shared story, but is also Pierre's precise position and point of view. And interesting in this book is also a second part, which is called the annex, where you can find a lot of documentation related to the discussions that happened back in the days. But now I would just start giving the floor to Pierre, and then let's see how the discussion develops.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Sorry not to speak in Italian, but I felt the need to relate to this experience through a book, just basically after the end of the exhibition in October, after the exhibition end, because we also had the experience to a closing which was in a very controversial closing exhibition. So a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of facts pushed me to the need to express my point of view. I was frustrated by the way the exhibition was interpreted. So I wanted to deliver my view on several references, and mainly starting from the work of the artist who inspired us for making this show, because that show has been also made through and based on statement or works of artists who deliver a solution for curatorial organization. So the need of explaining and giving like a perspective of the exhibition through the lens of the works was for me crucial. So that's how I started this book, and I also had the chance during the long time of organizing the show, because we were involving very early in 2015, late 2015. I arrived at the invitation of Adam in Athens to start to work, and that moment was very special in Athens, because it was in between the crisis of the governmental crisis. There were no government at that time. It was an election situation. Syriza was starting to become very dominant, but the situation of the country, of the city, was really collapsing. And when I arrived in Athens, I really made the difference between where I was coming from, Paris, very organized and very developed, and even too domesticated situation. And in Athens, it was a bit the contrary. It was very apparently collapsing in every part. So it was a shock for me to also discover this situation. And we had the first 6 months to go through this crisis till the summer, when Syriza has been elected, and then when finally the duel with Europe has been lost by the government, and they decided to finally accept the condition in the summer. So it was a very strong experience to have to go through all these events and to prepare the project with this in the background. And so it's important to go back on the history of Documenta, because I think each Documenta has its very specific context, for sure, historical, and also all the issue of Documenta have had a crisis in a way. So, or we can summarize a little bit a group of several Documenta. So the first 3 Documenta made by Arnold Bold, made in the Friedrichshain in Reims, so after the war, were in a way the result of a crisis of the war. So it was 3 Documenta that tried to address the modern art after to have been denied by the previous regime of the Nazi, who, as you know, were expressing another way to consider culture. So this has been an attempt to restore the modern art. And the first crisis happened with the Documenta 4th, and this Documenta has been interesting because it was the moment of the move to pop art and minimalism, and the dominance of the gallery, American gallery, in the Documenta created a crisis, and some artists and some curator or some people even left the exhibition, like Martial Rice. And there is a film, a very interesting film of Jeff Cornelius, a Belgian filmmaker who has developed a documentary about this crisis, which is in a way a kind of a model for me, for the book I have trying to also make for Documenta 14, because in this film you can really follow the debate, and what was the context of this documenta, and what was exactly the topic. So it's extremely interesting to be able also to consider the environment, the political environment of each documenta. And the next one, the fifth, has been an answer in a way to this documenta fourth with the famous Harald Zeeman documenta fifth, who was based on the idea of doing a festival of 3 weeks with living artists, with living processes inside the show. So he didn't really achieve this concept. He did the 100 or the 3 months show, but the main idea was to make a rupture with a final object exhibition, like it was with the previous pop art and minimalism show. He wanted to involve physically and in a processual way the artist and the audience. And that show was really also very controversial and received as a provocation. So it's interesting to understand that then after this 5, maybe several other documenta were kind of coming back to a more conservative way, and I would say that Rudy Fuchs, the documenta 7, come back on a very domesticated way to approach art. That was the time when they renovate the Friderizianum, which was originally a big hall. And they divided, they make levels, they reconfigured the Friderizianum and the orangerie in a kind of domesticated space, in a kind of white cube space, much more related to gallery system or to private space. So it was a strong back to the market-oriented view on the documenta with Rudy Fuchs. And maybe the documenta 9 became like the peak of the master curator with Jan Hout, who really achieved a kind of position that was all about his way to see Western art. And I think the rupture has become then with Catherine David, who make a break with this reduced view on Western art and open a much more global view. So then you know, I will not go on every documenta, but there were some following after what Catherine David has opened. For sure, Okui and Visor organized the extension, and he was himself bringing another view on the way to approach art and culture. And he also started to develop outside projects, so in different countries. Also exporting and trying to simultaneously offering a different point of view all over the world, and not just a Kassel view. So then the following has been Berger and Christoph Bakajev, and that maybe extend this attempt to consider a more global view. And I think with Adam, we reach a point of deconstructing completely the central position of documenta. Geographically, in a very concrete division between two countries, not just an annex, not just a side project, but a concrete presence simultaneously in two situations, two different situations, and relevant for another kind of relation, which were not anymore the East and West, but the North and South. And what I have myself considered very important is that we have been invited to conceive documenta from Athens mainly, and then develop from Athens and develop the consequences in Kassel, which is extremely different than to making the project from Kassel and developing to Athens, for instance. It was not that. It was exactly the reverse side, and that I think we have to insist that it is crucial. Another crucial point for me was that with Adam, the relation to the collective started, and he initiated a much more horizontal way to work, and as he was himself inspired by works that are based on open form, he really initiated in the curatorial work, but also in the exchange with the artist, a much more horizontal process that generates situation much more than deliver final product, I would say. So that was another important aspect, because we will see that the current documenta inherited from that, and I think it would have been never possible that a collective run the documenta if Adam have not initiated this possibility. So that's really what I try to explain in this book. But now I'm very happy that Adam is here and can also deliver his own view on both this report, but also about the current situation with the Documenta 15. So I'll leave you, Adam, giving your view on the situation.
So, was ist passiert in Athen? This was the title of one of the newspapers attacking Documenta because there was a over-budget situation, but the title of the newspaper was not what's happening in Documenta, but what's happening in Athens, because of course a group of European curators going to the south, Athens like Rome, would immediately throw money out of the window and spend them in a wrong way. So Adam, was ist passiert in Athen?
Thank you, Salvatore and Pierre, and thank you, Luca, for inviting us to discuss here in Rome. On the pretext is, of course, the book, and in the book you will find Pierre's exhaustive essay, which I think deals with a kind of political reading of the economy behind Documenta. So, in a way, from the very beginning, there was an economic issue built into the kind of disparity between the economic situation of Germany as a stable center of the European order and Greece as one of the countries that during the time were branded as those countries that should be quickly readjusted in order for this order economically to be and politically to be sustained. And maybe this was one fundamental reason why I thought, when I was invited to submit the proposal for Documenta, and I thought about, this history of Documenta, and that I'm kind of obliged or expected to make another chapter, I started to feel very uncomfortable with this idea of Documenta Kassel, and I didn't quite know what to do with this discomfort. And few years, that was 2013 or so, or maybe 2012 even, summer, I think. And a few years before, I met Salvatore, who was at that time running the gallery, the municipal gallery in Siracusa, the Galleria di Montevergine in Siracusa. And I also knew Pierre back then, we're talking like 2007, because Pierre was running the Center of Contemporary Art in Bretigny in France. So in a way, they both run institutions that were not in the center, but they were located, one outside of Paris and the other one somewhere in the beginning of Sicily and at the end of Italy, somewhere there. And I remember also when I met Salvatore for the first time, he showed me the book that he had made at that time, which has, I don't speak any Italian, but the book was called Ma non al Sud, which means but not in the south. So I guess there was a first impulse to think about a possibility of nevertheless doing a project in the south, and more importantly from the south, in order to create another production situation, which I think we did, especially with the part of the show in Athens. And in this part of the show especially, Salvatore was also involved, although it was an undercover operation with Paolo Do as well. So right now I think we can, who is sitting here, the fourth agent of this Documenta 14. So Paolo and Salvatore's activity in Athens was one of the forms of, let's say, decentering and complexifying the authorship in the exhibition. Because I remember reading a book, a small book, an essay by Søren Grammel on curatorial practice of Harald Zeman, who curated in 1972 a very famous Documenta 5. And this curating model, which Harald Zeman embodied, can be described as an auctorial model. So curator is the author, in a way, of the exhibition. And I think the auctorial model of curating reached its apex with Documenta 13, curated by Caroline Christoph Bakardziev, who basically placed the part of the exhibition in the symbolic center and in a geometric, let's say, center of the show, which is not only just Fridericianum, but the very center of this central two-winged building, which is a little rotonda. And I will say something about the history of this round space later. But what we saw in Documenta 13 was a part of the show called Brain. So the question was here, whose brain is it? You know, like, if there is a brain, this brain maybe belongs to someone. So it's tempting to read this brain as a let's say, metaphorical representation of the mind, let's say, brain and mind. I'm not sure if it's the same, but like mind of the curator. So it was a collection of objects, artifacts, artworks, documentary material that in a condensed way represented the trajectory of the curator, of the female curator in this case, who did this documenta. So the visitors who would visit Fridericianum would enter this space of the curatorial brain and find out about the thoughts and ideas of that single individual, who of course worked with many other individuals on the way. So it's a kind of in condensed form, the kind of genealogy, or in a nutshell, a genealogy of intellectual and aesthetic genealogy of the exhibition. So another immediate impulse being confronted with this brain idea in the center was to perform a certain decapitation, so to eliminate the head of the exhibition. And since I asked and I received the position of the head of the exhibition, I had to perform a kind of auto decapitation, meaning that I had to distribute the authority that I was invested with by the decision of the selection committee to other individuals and agencies, let's say. And this happened in several steps. The geographic and political move to have the exhibition not in Kassel, but not in the north, but in the south, was one such move. But the next move was to invite several curators and have them work together in a kind of discord, mostly, and sometimes in accord, in several steps. So this curatorial team, let's say, or group or collective, these terms are not innocent, and I still have a problem naming, the structure, because it was quite atypical, let's say. So there were meetings, but these meetings were regular up to a certain moment, and then everybody went to work on different, let's say, sections of this huge construction site into cities. So the structure of our work in this team, I like to compare it to the method that was developed and kind of patented by an African-American composer called Butch Morris, who was born in 1947 and died recently. And Butch Morris developed this way of making music and playing together that he called conduction. So conduction can be best described as a sort of organized improvisation or structured improvisation. So basically he would invite different people who were virtuosic or excellent in playing on certain instruments and certain types of music to meet together, not on the basis of formal similarities or common, let's say, a track record of some past projects that they did together, but in a very atonal way, bring them together and then try as a conductor of this process that he termed conduction to produce a piece of music, a performance, which I think pretty much describes the kind of process that we embarked on with Documenta. And there were several contributions that had more structural character, and definitely Pierre's contribution to the show was to provide certain vocabulary and certain, I would say, set of scores to organize the field of the exhibition within which all individual artists and the curators too and all other participants could could find a place. But it was not about making a completely amorphic or amorphous exhibition. It was about making an exhibition that is growing organically from the response to the circumstances that we encountered in Athens that were partly predictable in a larger pattern, the economic crisis, the destruction of social, let's say, cohesion, and the kind of quite dramatic moment reshaping life of individuals in a very brutal way. On the other hand, repeat this process, so to perform alternate take just a few weeks later in Kassel with the same group of performers, so to say, artists, curators, and others. So what I was insisting on, that this has to be repeated, you know, so I'm kind of interested in this idea of repetition. I like to think that there is something to learn from in the idea of not inventing everything again and again anew, but like doing it again, and quite stubbornly, because the context will tell, and you will reach entirely different results and conclusions. So this is probably what stretched the limits of the organization of Documenta, which is built on the idea of singular project and singular authorship and singular experience. This experience is supposed to be limited to Kassel only, orchestrated by artistic director, and so on and so forth. So when we finally opened Documenta in Kassel, the Documenta had already happened. It namely happened in Athens. So we consciously sort of debased the idea of the beginning, for instance, because there is something very joyful and pleasant about anticipation of the opening. So in a way, with this Documenta it was different, because when we kind of opened the Documenta in Kassel, it was like saying, yes, but Documenta already opened somewhere else, you know. And I think that many visitors were trying to come to terms with that. And yesterday I had an interesting conversation with someone here who told me that she only visited Documenta for the first time, and she only visited Documenta in Athens, and she didn't go to Kassel for some reasons. So for me that was kind of interesting type of audience who, first of all, has no previous experience with seeing Documenta and kind of internalizing this history and this anticipation of the greatness and somehow of ultimative statement that Documenta should be. No, it's somebody who comes to Documenta in Athens and sees it maybe in a similar way like those visitors who came to see the gardening exhibition in Kassel in 1955. There was a big exhibition of gardening organized in Germany, because gardening is an activity very suitable for the time of peace. So 10 years after the Second World War, in completely destroyed city, the president of the Federal Republic was to inaugurate this Gartenschau, the exhibition of gardening, and Arnold Bode with his collaborators, some of whom recently turned out to be involved with Nazi state organizations, so not entirely innocent, but survivors of the war and trying to make a contemporary art exhibition, probably at that time. They attached the Documenta to this gardening show. So I think that there is something like a twofold genealogy already at the origin of the project, that in a way is like saying, no, it's not a gardening show, but it's kind of like art show, but we do it because there is a gardening show, you know, there's a kind of strange doubling already there. And I think the visitors who came to Kassel and saw these works of modern art for the first time maybe since 1930s, because since 1935, 36, it was becoming nearly impossible in Germany to show avant-garde art. So one could say that this art was erased from public view for about 15 years. Okay, so in Athens, the visitors who would come, maybe they had a similar experience of some sort of beginning or new way of seeing things. If we manage to make it work according to our intention as the curators of that edition. It was like starting from the scratch in a way, but in an entirely different context than the context of Documenta in Kassel and in Germany.
Well, thank you. One thing I want to add, which I think was always on the air, it's difficult to talk about something that you think that everyone knows about, but maybe, I mean, this relation Athens, Kassel, Greece, Germany has been said, of course, was related a lot to the crisis of that moment, the economical crisis. So Greece being the problem of European Union, economical system or economical union. But of course, on the other side, Athens is not just one of the South. Athens is the motherland of what they call the European culture. I mean, the culture they are so proud of grew there. And we could also say that Greece or Athens was invented nearly by Germans. I mean, German philologists, German archaeologists, of course, British as well. Now I'm just simplifying. But this was also not only in the air, but was one of the bases, one of the many traces that were followed during the researches for Documenta. A lot of works deal with that, and of course it was impossible to deny, but just to have it in mind that all these discourses were very much based on certain situations and certain places and were not generic, which I thought it was the most important challenge. And also, how can I say, it was a possible measurement. I mean, I think most of the time I had conversations about Documenta 14 back in the days was about how can this be done better, what was the mistake here, can we do it in Kassel, this. So it was never seeing the whole picture, all the greatness of it, but still trying to, on the way, in the process, in the middle of the process. So thinking back then, things freeze a bit and you start really enjoying it more, or rediscuss it, as Pierre has been doing in his book, rediscussing it, but it's like when a book is printed, you cannot change any more word, and then you will slowly understand if it's, what are the value of it. And of course, one of the works Pierre is discussing a lot, which was, I think you could, in the book, is this Parthenon, size 1:1, right? That was in the square in front of Friedrichshain Museum, which is the building which is the core of Documenta. And so in this square, people could see a Parthenon sized 1:1. Pierre, I think, can talk about it much better than I can. And at the same time, the Friedrichshain, as Adam was mentioning before, tracing a little bit of the history of that building, was the only building where the curators of Documenta 14 didn't curate, because it was a sort of ready-made concept, no? Did you curate the exhibition there? No.
I mean, yes, you might remember that in Friedrichshain we showed the collection of Emst, which is the Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens. That was at the time when we were working on Documenta closed due to funding shortage, organizational problems, kind of inherent to perhaps the situation of Greece at that time, and this museum could not open famously over many years. And it was not only that we wanted to use the space of Emst, because we could have also use some other spaces, but for me it was a kind of pedagogical goal to activate this museum and to have it run for 100 days, because Documenta was called once Museum of 100 Days. Okay, so this is, if you change the meaning of this phrase, Documenta is a museum of for 100 days in Kassel, then you could also see that opening the museum called Emst for 100 days is like another way of showing a possibility. At the same time, since we used Emst for exhibitions of artists who were in Documenta 14, we had to give something back. And that's why we decided to replace the exhibition that normally would take place in Fridericianum with the exhibition of the collection of Emst. And the curating of this collection was done by the curators of the Emst, of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Athens. So it was a, let's say, relocation and also, again, first ever exhibition of this collection, which is now slowly, 5 years after Documenta, being shown in some form. And we did not see our task here as to influence the way this collection is presented and displayed. So in a way we considered it as a sort of cultural fact at a given time, according to the ideas that the appointed curators, director and curators of that museum in Athens had. And that's why we, next to this Parthenon by Argentina artist Marta Minuchin, and in the building, which is a kind of late Baroque, neoclassical building, Fridericianum, that used to be a library and that used to be a space, a kind of museum, Museum Fridericianum, that we decided to show the holdings of the Athenian museum that could not open in the center of Documenta, producing in a way a feeling of it's kind of like a production of a feeling of a phantom limb, maybe, in the sense that for a lot of visitors, especially professionals with whom I spoke, it was very disorienting to not encounter a curatorial statement of Documenta 14 in the Fridericianum and instead see the collection of a museum which is just shipped to Kassel and arranged in all available spaces, except for the central space where the meetings and sessions of what we call the Parliament of Bodies were taking place. And the reason why Parliament of Bodies was taking place in the center of Fridericianum was also that in this building there was once, during the, let's say, French rule following Napoleon's campaign in that part of what then became Germany, there was a kingdom of Westphalia established, and it was a constitutional monarchy, so it had a kind of proto-constitution and proto-parliament, and this parliament convened for a few years in the rotunda of Fridericianum. So there was a kind of trace of a presence of political representation, although, let's say, by contemporary standards, if there are any contemporary standards of such representations, quite different. But yet we attempted to bring the heterogeneity and kind of polyphonic experience in the center of Fridericianum instead of this idea of singular brain or definitive curatorial statement. And then in this surrounding, with this kind of parliament at the center where people convened and discussed, there were collections of the Museum of Emst sort of distributed through the building. And maybe the last thing that I would like to say before I give the microphone to Pierre is that I was quite interested in the idea that both Germany and Greece in the beginning of the 19th century were going through this moment of nation building or creation of sovereign state, which is a very toxic and dubious idea as we see until today. And this formation of sovereign states looked a little bit different in Germany and Greece. And we were interested in, for instance, using the Museum of Grimm brothers in Kassel, because this museum is dedicated to these two philologists who laid out the foundation of the German language, both in terms of collecting fairy tales and myths, so the kind of mythical, let's say, foundation for a society to come, but also creating a dictionary of the German language, for which they employed a huge network of top philologists and librarians and other men of letters in Germany at that time. So they would trace the origins of words as remote in the past as they could. So they run this work, monumental work of creating a dictionary, and they got it to the letter, I think, K or N, when death stopped them from finishing the German dictionary. But others continued, and the final dictionary was only published, if I'm not mistaken, in the 1930s or so. And German grammar, you know. So we were not so interested in kind of illustrating the fairy tales, but we were interested in the intention to organize the language before the state is organized, you know. And in a way, what was happening in Greece was a little bit of a different version, but it was also, I think, a kind of philological operation or remapping of a territory, because, like Salvatore said before, the archaeology and also philology organized outside of Greece, so not only through and not mostly through the Greek emigrants or Greeks in Europe on the turn of 18th and 19th century, but through German philologists such as Schlegel brothers and others who kind of conceived of this idea of Greece, you know, which was supposed to be the model. And then during the Greek War of Independence, when all foreign powers were mixing in, this idea of the new state built on a certain understanding of classical tradition was put in place. And the Bavarian monarchy was installed in the country to rule it. And this Bavarian monarchy, and later on the Danish monarchy that followed in the 19th century, established institutions and gave them costumes, mostly neoclassical. So if you walk through one of the central avenues of Athens, you have this famous trilogy of buildings, including the library and the academy, and so on and so forth, in a neoclassical costume. So there was a kind of like a rather violent reclassicization of a country that was basically a or of a place, Athens in this case, that was rather provincial, part of the Ottoman Empire. I mean, Thessaloniki would be much more important at that time. And this nation building process involved two different traditions. On the one hand, uncovered through efforts of archaeologists from several different countries, making of Greece referring to the roots in the Periclean period, both in terms of drama, democracy, in all those aspects. And at the same time, this part was mixed with the tradition of the Orthodox Church. And this marriage between the Orthodox Church and classical tradition is very difficult relationship, I would say, to forge and to build on, but it did happen. And until today, I think to a large degree, defines the life of the Greek society in terms of its ideological framework. Okay, so that was just an excursus to Grimm brothers.
Yeah. To make the link with the pattern of books of Martha Minuchin, I give a bit of explanation in this book about the project and also about the practice of Martha Minuchin since early performance. For instance, this prototype of temples that she used first in Buenos Aires in '83 during the junta to celebrate the end of the junta with the books that were banished during the time of the dictatorship, and they built this Parthenon, which was not a full-scale Parthenon. It was just a structure. They built it in Buenos Aires in '83, and she used this temple as like a prototype of this Western emblem of culture background. And this shape is also the one used for parliament, for bank, for all institution, academy, transversal to every use. And that's how she also decided to use that in Kassel to bring back that topic. But much more important is also that this process of construction based on scaffolding, on a very easy and recycled material, has been also organized through the process, through the time duration of the documenta, and was also like a parallel track, like something addressing durational process, which is built by the artist, by the curator, by the team, but also by the audience. And all the Parthenon has been a collective progress to be edified, and the deconstruction and the disappearance of the Parthenon has been also organized during the documenta, before the end and after. The concept was exactly to follow an alternative relation to duration. It was also very important to consider that, and that's why the title of the book is "The Continuum Was Performed in the Following Manner," because the concept of continuum, the concept is a concept of duration, a concept that break with an offer of a time slot that are the previous proposal in the previous documenta, meaning that with this documenta we try to offer to reconstitute an ecosystem, a durational experience that you cannot for sure get in full, but you can feel, you can go through an experience in time, a durational experience. It not means that you have to go in each thing exclusively. It is an invitation to have a feeling and to have an experience. So that was also a large break with the previous proposal, which were much more related to deliver final durational project or final space relation, like things that are successive and deliver like one after the other. We choose to offer a much more durational experience, which is I think what follow the current documenta and go even beyond this proposal. That has been possible, I think also, I insist on that, because Adam chose to also escape the normative organization of the administration in Kassel and created ex nihilo in Athens a new form of organization, which were completely free of, like from scratch. So we had the chance not to have any or very less normative organization in order to innovate and to organize differently the documenta in his entire scale, Athens and Kassel. So this is important because that's something which is in question each time. And I think what is interesting when we hear the curator of Documenta 15, it is the way they have, with some strategy, tried to remove or reform the organization, the cooperation between the artists for the production of the works, because they follow the need and the wish to transform not just the content but also the structure of the organization of the exhibition, because this is also what is a break from 14 now with 15, is that the organization is itself the object of the exhibition. The goal is also how you organize and how you deliver and share the content with the audience, but also with collective or artists who are not supported by any market back or have no assistance in their own cultural field. So that started with our invitation to artists which were completely not identified on any art scene in some region of the world, and that was quite new, because all the previous documenta were dealing with a business model, I have to say, which was based on taking the artists who are supported by galleries, because documenta couldn't produce the work, so they were addressing that to the gallery that were able to support the artists that they invited. We tried to break with this, and Adam decided to pay the artist for the first time in the history of documenta. So that was a big change in the business model, I would say, even if it was very modest. It was a new way to consider the production. And I think one group has initiated a step further, organize a cooperative in which they share production cuts between the artists. They try to organize something which was much more collective and cooperative than something that is given separately. So this is extremely important, because there is no other context of experimentation on that level. I mean, no fair, no art fair make any experimentation on that level, or any other exhibition try to reform the way to produce or share culture at the moment. So that's why it's extremely important to consider documenta as a very important experimental moment for that go beyond a certain normative way to produce culture. Please, you can maybe open the discussion. I don't know.
Yeah, that's, sorry, I don't see your eyes, so I didn't understand you were talking to me. I thought you wanted Adam to add. No, yeah, I think now we can really see if among you there are questions or comments. We don't know if you have ever seen Documenta 14, or how many of you have seen it.
Yes, yeah. In fact, what to say? I mean, there is a famous a famous joke. Once, sorry. Pierre already know this joke. Once to Mao Zedong, a journalist, asked to Mao Zedong, President, could you comment for us the event of the French Revolution? And Mao say, I think it's too early to judge this fact. Now it's past, I think, the fact that we discussed around 10 years ago. So, and maybe yes, it's too early because Adam is right. There was a kind of take a step in advance, something that was a kind of anticipation. Right, to not land in the present, but to grasp the actuality. And this, I think, is politically also true, that you have to act in this anticipation. Is very is the materiality, let's say, of the transformation when you can use this anticipation. And Adam and all of us used in a certain way this kind of institution as a linguistic game of the kids. Just to back to the Brothers Grimm, let's pretend that Documenta for this institution is a cultural institution, but let's pretend that it's also a political institution, and let's pretend that also is an artistic institution, but also let's pretend it is a social institution. And it was an institutional game in a very serious way that take place in a very contextualized historical time of Europe. And Team Documenta 14 at that point was also very able to take this actuality, really to grasp it. And so yes. Maybe, yes, it's too early also to speak for Documenta 14 because we needed maybe, to repeat it, to speak properly about Documenta 14. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. Yeah.
I'll take the red one. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you for sharing that kind of your experience about it, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book, actually. I haven't seen the Documenta 14, but I now kind of started to see it in my head, and there was some thoughts that I thought maybe are productive to share, so I'm going to try to put them together now. What I thought was really interesting, your introduction into the history of Documenta actually kind of reminded me of the fact that it was from the beginning a pedagogical project. It was about re-educating Germans who would go there and then see what had happened outside of Germany, basically re-educating them in the project of abstract art. And I was thinking about what if you would actually consider the whole history of Documenta as this pedagogical project, and what that eventually would mean for the question that you asked yourself about the decentering actually of the curatorial project and the curatorial perspective. Because to create a pedagogical discourse or pedagogical setting or a classroom, if you want to say so, you can't step out of the way. You can't be like, decenter the discourse. You need to have some kind of fraction, or you need to present something that people can react to or learn from. And I think this is something really interesting, because I think things being didactical or things being pedagogical, I mean, that was kind of a very popular slur. No, if you wouldn't like a piece of art, you'd say, oh, I don't like it, it's so didactical. But I think this whole discourse around Documenta is very much also centered around it being a pedagogical project. And also, in comparison to other contemporary art exhibitions, actually Documenta is seen by a lot of people that don't regularly go. to art exhibitions. So maybe that's something interesting to discuss or think about. How can you create a pedagogical setting in an exhibition without kind of reinforcing a certain hierarchy, while pedagogy, I would say or suggest, does need a certain structure or maybe even a certain hierarchy. I hope that wasn't too abstract.
This question of, let's say, educational function was articulated for the first time during Documenta in 1997, which was created by Catherine David. And Catherine David introduced this great format of 100 days and 100 guests, okay? So that for me was a great inspiration, because I like to think about exhibitions that are not like displays of objects, but I like to see them as kind of populated spaces, let's say, with people, you know, visitors and others. So I kind of like this change of perspective from museum of 100 days to 100 days of visits, of guests, you know, the guests who are coming to speak, to share their experience. So that was one important, let's call it inspiration, or and then let's say relentlessly pedagogical in terms of the subject matter addressed was the following Documenta curated by Okwi Envezo, who brought the entire, let's say, world intentionally with its pain in the center of that exhibition, without really questioning the kind of format or the way the exhibition is conceived. So it was an exhibition, but it was an exhibition that was preceded by several sessions that were taking place very far from Kassel, in places like New Delhi and Santa Lucia in Caribbean, and Documenta was in this rhetorical operation only the final or last stage of the project that took people on journeys beyond their frame, the usual Western European frame and the corresponding art world and so on. So, of course, there is a pedagogical aim of that, which is to unlearn certain perception of what art can do, or rather what art cannot do, you know. So I think in several attempts by those who made Documenta exhibitions, there was this intention to save something from the art, or art as a possibility, you know, a possibility of change, perhaps. And in a very systematic way, but also in a very practical way, the Documenta, under artistic direction of Roger Burgel and Ruth Noack, addressed this pedagogy like very straightforward, because it kind of, on the one hand, went into a dialogue with a tradition of the of educated German bourgeoisie, let's say, what's the word? Gebildete Bürgertum, oder? So heißt das, oder? Ist das gebildete Bürgertum? Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's this wonderful term, which it's like enlightened Bürgertum, yes, the bourgeoisie, the citizens of the town, you know, but So the Documenta of Roger Burgel and Ruth Noack had magazines which had kind of titles such as one title was Life, which is a big term. I quite like that. It addressed the modernism and within the larger project of modernity, but it also kind of cut short to life, and it installed in Kassel something called Documenta Beirat, which is the Documenta Council, which included citizens of Kassel who were participating in meetings and producing knowledge and manifestations, public expression, so to say, of ideas that are usually completely hidden from view because the art world does not come to Kassel to learn something about Kassel, you know. And they try to change that. They try to show that we are working in a real place. And they created the Citizens Council to the curatorial, let's say, project. So there are many concepts in the last, let's say, 23 years or 25 years that they led to an entirely different exhibition, both in the way it is produced and in the way it can be seen, like the one in this year, where Salvatore was there and I was there for a couple of days, and it's really an entirely different way of thinking about what used to be an art exhibition. I'm not sure if we can call it art exhibition like other art exhibitions. Yes, there is art in this exhibition. This can be stated, and you just don't see that type of, for instance, painting, or you don't see anything that you can see normally in museums or galleries, and nothing has this courtesy of, it's courtesy of the makers mostly, and the makers are very strongly embedded in specific situations in their places where they work, at considerable risk, because to run a kind of progressive art project or like be an activist in a place like, I don't know, Dhaka, Bangladesh, or Indonesia, where the curatorial, let's say, collective is mostly coming from, it's an entirely different story. So this documenta is maybe the first documenta that is not like a meta project on Western modernity, but it's really saying something from the perspectives that were previously excluded and eliminated in the pattern of seeing art and larger culture that was established in the West and U.S.-led West, basically to which we owe this documenta. You can see it as an extension of Marshall Plan in Europe post-war. And now this model is crumbling, and we don't know what's going to happen, because right now there is a huge mess and a polemic that went completely beyond the artistic issues, because, as you know, some of the works displayed in Documenta 15 have anti-Semitic stereotypes, representations of Jews in a stereotyped way, and of course it is in a context of some or another political statement, but it's not excusable. But this, on the other hand, is becoming the single point for which this documenta is and will remain judged. So the entire presence of maybe 1,000 or 1,500 makers, artists, and so forth from around the globe, who present and make the work in Kassel, is largely remaining not discussed. Okay, so there is a kind of substitute subject for which to judge documenta politically, morally, to speak immediately about the need to remove, to rethink the idea of autonomy of documenta and so forth. And the exhibition is somehow disappearing, at least in the public discourse so far. But I hope that they will find a way to deal with this critique, and some kind of dialogue could be reestablished, perhaps. And I think it's a must to see this exhibition, because it's really like no other, and maybe it's a beginning of something completely different, or maybe at least an attempt to mark a different beginning, I think.
Super. Someone else wants to say something? Pierre, do you want to say something to end, or? Okay. So the conclusions to the continuum to the conclusions.
Okay, I would like so to thanks Andrea Bellini to have helped to produce this publication, and for sure without his support the publication could have not been made in English and in Italian, because I have not yet found any French or German publisher interested to make that book. So it's a bit a miracle to have been supported by Andrea and by, for sure, NERO, who were very enthusiastic to publish this book, and I'm very glad and I'm very proud to be part of the collection. I like very much the book, I have to say, so thanks for the entire NERO team, and thanks also for sure Adams to contribute to this publication, because and Salvatore for the translation part, because it was important for me also to gather in the book very key text, record documents that are the open letters made by the artist during the following of the crisis about the debt that we have to support, hopefully at the end of the exhibition, not at the beginning as it is now. Unfortunately, is the case for Documenta 15. So all the records are in the book, and also a conversation about Adam with Dorota Zajewska, that I thanks also for her contribution for that book. And I would like to say that I'm stand with Documenta 15 to try to find a way to break this doctrine of the Excel table, like I say in the book, and to find the way to develop a much more round table way of debate and solving problems. So let's hope that it will happen soon, and that we can for sure speak about the mistake, because there is some mistake at the moment, there is no doubt, but these mistakes should not be the focal point of the entire human adventure that is Documenta. So I hope that everything will go in a productive way and be a great debate. And thank you for coming tonight.
So we go. And special thanks to Macro. But the director is talking, so thank you for having us here. And thanks to you all. And there are free drinks upstairs offered by NERO. Of course it was a joke, eh? Sorry? Ah, lucky.